All right. So I have now started with recording. And so again, Candace, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
But this is a video that we're putting together for our students at Avila, just to get students oriented, thinking about teletherapy as they are starting to go out into the field and to perhaps do that kind of work. So I am joined here by two of our wonderful full-time faculty, Dr. Amy Butcher and Dr. Gina Staves.
Hello.
Yes, wonderful. And then also one of our alums, Candace Holloman.
Hello.
Yeah, so if we might start, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more, Candace, about just remind me when you graduated and what things have looked like since then for you.
Yes. So I graduated in 2011, and I was licensed by 2012, and my internship had been at Hope House while I was with Avila, and then I continued to work for them off and on until I had my second child in 2014. And at that point, I experienced very severe postpartum anxiety and depression. So I stepped away from the field for a few years, just tried to get myself back on track. And that really, I'm actually thankful for that, because it really just honed me in on the population that I wanted to work with. And I wanted to work with women, specifically mothers, of children of all ages, because, you know, the first part is difficult, but then there's just new difficulties with every stage. So that just really inspired me to open my own private practice. Additionally, I really just wanted the flexibility, and, you know, I wanted to set my own pay rate. So that really, you know, got the idea of private practice into my head. But I struggled to try to figure out how could I work, you know, building my own business with being a mom of little children. And I kind of just stumbled upon this community within the mental health field of other therapists who were online only. And that really just kind of was like a light bulb moment for me. I'm like, I could do this from home, you know, while still being here for my children. And, you know, I could really just build a practice online. So that's kind of how I fell into the idea of becoming an online therapist before COVID and everything hit.
Mm-hmm. So how many years has it been that you've been doing teletherapy?
So I started building the practice. The idea came to me in 2017, and then I started building in 2018. Spent a whole lot of time doing research, and there's a lot of money that goes into it at first. So I kind of took baby steps and took my time. And by 2019, I opened. So I've been doing this for a little over a year now, and my practice is really thriving, especially now with everything going on. I've got a lot of mothers who are really needing this right now. So it's been going.
Were you working like for another job while you were slowly building the practice?
I had done some side jobs that didn't have to do with the field. I had a friend who's a financial advisor, and I filed paperwork for him and things like that, but nothing that was in the field. I found that to be a little too much for me when I was trying to get myself kind of in order with everything. So I did step away for a little while. That's why I'm still under supervision right now, still accumulating hours.
Okay.
Nice.
And then did you mention if you were at Hope House, I'm thinking you are licensed or seeking licensure in Missouri?
So I had started down that path, and that was prior to the second child thing.
Sure.
And so that was originally my idea. And when I stepped back from the field, I kind of let that go. And I'm actually licensed in Kansas now. And so I am pursuing my licensure on the Kansas side. However, I do have a couple of clients in Missouri, and we can talk more about this later, because they have opened up the border, at least Missouri has, for Kansas therapists. So
That's
we can
true.
talk more in depth about all that, the state line confusion later.
Sure. Yes, you bet. That's definitely for us. We'll get to that. Yeah, well, and you've spoken to this some, but I'd so love to know more as well. Just your main resources, your main methodology for learning about teletherapy.
Mm-hmm. there's a whole lot of information out there, especially now. But when I first started researching, and I do believe she is still probably the foremost therapist in the United States that is just very knowledgeable, but her name is Dr. Amber Lyda, Lyda, and she is a very well-known trauma therapist in Florida, and she does all online therapy, and she actually was kind of a pioneer in the field. You know, she really dove in when everyone else told her that, you know, this wasn't really a thing, you can't really do that. She's very successful, and she's actually turned it into a business of teaching other therapists how to be online and, you know, the right way to do it. She offers a course. She offers a free Facebook group called Online Therapists Group, and it is so just a treasure trove of information. Anything you could ever want to know, you just search in that group and you're going to find an answer, and it's just a great place to go. But I really highly recommend her course as well if anyone's wanting to really pursue that.
Sure. And I think before, when you were telling me a little bit about it, my sense was that gave you some real concrete tools, but also kind of some bigger picture things to think about.
Yeah, she both her course and her group cover all of the, you know, rules and regulations. She also just tells you how to open a practice from the ground up. You have a lot of people from different states, obviously, so there's a lot of discussion, you know, what are we doing in our state? What's the rules for this state? You know, how do we go about all of this? And there are some other courses out there too that I forgot to mention. There's a course by Person-Centered Tech, TECH, and they're, you know, they focus more on like the security, the technology part of it, how to be safe that way, but that's also a good course. And then I think the ACA has also released, you know, with COVID and everything, they've released a lot more free courses, or even low fee courses that teach some of these things too. So there's a lot of information out there, but Amber Lyda is probably the best resource that I've found. And for both, like you said, both big picture and detailed, or she'll even give you scripts on how to, you know, do your first, you know, consult with a client. So she's very, very helpful.
Yeah, that's great. That's good to know. And I had not heard about her until you had mentioned her to me. So yeah, knowing about her, and then also I was curious just more locally too. So as you mentioned, Kansas and Missouri, how do you keep up on that kind of information?
Yes, so that's really important, because you obviously don't want to be violating any rules that you don't know about. So it's very important to stay up with, if you're operating Kansas, you obviously want to keep up with the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. They usually post all of their laws and, you know, everything, their statutes and everything. They post those on their website. I've also communicated with them directly, as has my supervisor. So we either call or email. It's better to get things in writing when you're communicating with the boards. Just so if anything ever comes back, you can refer back to that. For the Missouri side, Gloria Lindsay, I believe, is the head of I think it's called the Committee for Professional Counselors in Missouri. And she is wonderful to work with. She is who I originally contacted to make sure, because before all of the COVID hit, we were limited to operate. You were only allowed to see clients who were physically located within your state. And that's how most states, you know, that's what most of them required. However, several, including Missouri, have opened their borders to teletherapists who are in other states if they want to see their clients in Missouri. And I communicated with Gloria about this, and she said that they were changing the laws there to allow for that. I don't believe Kansas allows that yet, but you never know. Things are constantly changing. So, but yes, definitely keep in touch with the boards. Check out their websites, call them, email them. Don't be afraid to bother them, because these are important things to remember. And then if you're under supervision, find a supervisor who's familiar with telehealth. And, you know, a lot of times they can get a little more answers from the board just because they're supervisors. So.
Yeah, good points. I noticed since COVID, when I go to the state licensing boards, lots of updates about teletherapy for people who are licensed, for trainees,
Mhm.
who are provisionally licensed. I mean, there's a lot of details there, and
Yes.
it
And
does
every state has it a little bit different too, so
show.
including the licensing.
Mhm.
So yes.
Yeah, so true. Appreciate that. Um, well, and also I'd just be curious, so in terms of getting certified in telehealth, is that something that you ever looked into, thought about?
Yes, so I've heard that there are specific certification programs. It is, at least in Kansas and Missouri, I can't speak for other states, but it's not required here. However, certain malpractice insurance companies could require you to be certified. And forgive me, but I am not sure of the companies who offer those exact certification programs. Um, but mine only required that I take a course of some kind on the safety of telehealth. So that's what I did, and that was good enough. I didn't have to be certified. But you definitely, no matter what, even if you're required or not to be certified, you definitely want to take some type of course, whether it be a free one, just something to make sure that you're, following all of the HIPAA compliance rules and all of that. So.
You bet.
Right. And I think, isn't it, if you should have a complaint filed against you, you want to be able to demonstrate that you have competence in this area. And that is one of the pieces of competence, is that you've had the training.
Yes, yes, I agree. Even if you're not, technically required, you definitely want to cross all your T's and dot all your I's with that, for sure.
You bet. Yeah, and there is a lot of training right now. I just keep seeing things pop up, especially online opportunities to learn more about teletherapy. So that's exciting.
Yes, I agree. I think it's it's really good that people are coming around to it. It's unfortunate, how it had to happen with all of this, but I think it's a very good addition to the field for a lot of clients. So.
Well, particularly mothers,
Yes.
and particularly now. I do
Yes.
not know what mothers of young kids who maybe they're going to go to school, maybe they're not, they're going to go on Monday.
That would
Right.
be, yes.
How do you live your life with that degree of upheaval? And it seems like, there are certain situations where I think telehealth or telecounseling is a lifesaver. I think about people in rural areas who don't have access to mental health professionals, and they could potentially see, like, Bessel van der Kolk, if he did this, if they were dealing with trauma. Now, I know that's pretty outrageous, but that's quite a benefit.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some nice things, I think.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, actually, Amy, that's a good segue. That was a line of questions that I thought would be good for us to talk about too. I might jump down to that and then I'll come back up. But just the thinking about certain kinds of clients or even presenting concerns that teletherapy is especially well suited for. But then also on the other side, if there might be some kinds of clients or issues that maybe there should be more thought, perhaps more caution around. So just, yeah, for us to discuss that as well.
Yes. Well, I'll just speak from what I've experienced. Obviously, I have a pretty honed in niche, with mothers and women, but I have still a very wide variety of diagnoses. Personality disorders and anxiety, depression. I see quite a few different types of clients, and it does seem to be pretty well suited to everyone that I see. In the groups that I've been in, there's been some discussion with child therapists. They're having, they're doing this, but they said it's a little more difficult, obviously, especially with the younger children. It's harder to get them to pay attention to the screen. Oftentimes a parent or guardian does have to be in the room with the child to make sure that they're paying attention. And so that, changes the whole dynamic, I think. But it is doable from what I've heard. Another group of therapists I've heard who are having a little more difficulty is those who see like the elderly clients, the ones who may not be tech savvy and, you know, understand how to do all of this. And it's very, very new to them. And so it's very uncomfortable. So they take a little longer to adjust, which is completely fine. But some of them are still doing it. So I think there's some that are easier than others. But I would say for the most part, it can be suited towards just about any client. One consideration would be clients in crises. That's got, you know, it's kind of a very polarizing thing because some therapists think, no, it never should do that. Others, they are doing it and it's working. I personally don't. I don't have the, you know, I'm still a mom first and foremost, and so I don't have the availability that that type of a client would need. So I do a screening, you know, process phone call before I see anyone. But, you know, the ones that are seeing crisis clients do have a lot of experience working with them. So I think that's really important. You have a lot of experience first before you would start seeing them online.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and definitely wanted to talk more about crisis situations too, but I guess first just staying with what kinds of clients teletherapy is a good fit for, and what perhaps maybe not as much. And I was just going to comment as you were talking about perhaps older population, geriatric. I know this summer I've tried to do some by video and have found that it just really has not worked as well. Where actually just phone has been better. And in part too, the population that I work with, they're in a facility and the Wi-Fi is so spread thin that to try to do it online, the screen freezes quite a bit. And there's my dog right on cue. And it's so disruptive. Whereas with a phone, we can continually talk, and just having that flow is so important. So lots of considerations.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Sorry. And I was also thinking and wondering too, I had concerns as well, like in abusive kinds of situations, domestic violence. I mean, I just think about when we meet with a client in a therapy office, how that is such a more protected, secured space. And here, you know, your client is wherever they are, and maybe not perhaps knowing who all is around the client, at least initially when you start the call, and just how, I guess being really thoughtful around that too, of what's perhaps in the best interest for the client and their well-being.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Personally, I haven't seen anyone who's in a serious domestic violence situation online. I have someone who's semi, you know, but they're usually pretty good about knowing when it's safe to talk at home versus not. Like, for example, the one I see, without saying too much, they will wait until the spouse is at work or for sure not in the house. I've seen other domestic violence therapists who have seen their client, they've kind of lacked. So I always tell my client, you know, you want to be on a very secure Wi-Fi with a password, you know, you don't want to be just driving in your car. However, the ones who see those who are in domestic violence situations, they'll kind of, you know, let that be a little more lenient because they need to be able to get out of the house. So maybe they'll go, say they're going to the grocery store, and then they'll go sit in the parking lot somewhere and be on their phone doing the session, so that, you know, they have that privacy and it's not known. But obviously you're going to want to be careful with any electronic communication, and set something, you know, set up a plan for that, to make sure that you don't accidentally give anything away. But yes, definitely a lot of considerations there.
Sure. Yeah, well, and so maybe, and please, anybody jump in. I know I keep kind of jumping in with questions and such, but wherever we need to go. but maybe coming back to the legal and ethical kinds of considerations, and like we were talking about, how knowing what state licensing boards, what's okay in terms of where the therapist is located, where the client is located, and I'd be curious what your process looks like, Candace. Like when you connect with a client, are you checking in on where they're located, and are you documenting that, or how does that?
Yes. Yes, that's a good point too, because technically if you see a client that is not in your state and it's not a state that's allowing you to cross the border, you're technically practicing without a license in that state, which is not a good thing, obviously. Same if you are in another state yourself, you have to physically be in the state that you're licensed. But yes, to answer your question, I do have it in my intake paperwork that I need the primary address of where they will physically be located during our sessions. Also, if they think they may be somewhere else at any time, they give me that secondary address, and then I have them sign something that says they will let me know if they are ever at a different location than the two that they've given me. I also check the background, like does it look like where they usually are? If it doesn't, I will just double check, are you at home, or if not, where are you? And then I document that whenever they are at a different location. Otherwise, it's just assumed that they are at home in my paperwork, in my notes. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a very important thing to know, not only to cover yourself, but in case there was an emergency, you want to know where to send emergency services. For the parking lot thing, and sorry I keep going on about things, but for the parking lot, if there's someone who has to sit in a parking lot to do it, they can actually send a pin, a GPS pin, like pin it on their phone. I've not had to do this yet. I've just heard that some people do. And they can text you that pin and it gives the exact location of where they're sitting if they don't know the address.
Right. Nice. Mm-hmm. Technology.
Right.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Sure. And have you ever had the situation where a client is on vacation and they still want to connect with you, but they're in some other state, somewhere away?
So I've had, not that actually happened, but I've had them, ask me, hey, I'm going to this place, next week, could we still keep our appointment? But I've never had anyone actually show up already there. So far, they've been good about asking me ahead of time. And I handle it, I say, that's probably not a good idea, just because I am not completely licensed yet. And so, when you're completely licensed, you have a little more leeway with that than you do when you're under supervision. Because I know then your supervisor has to be licensed there and it gets a lot more complicated. So I just say no, unless it's like Missouri and they allow me to do that, which I think Idaho, is the only other state that I've heard of yet that allows that. But if you are a fully licensed therapist, I have heard that you can contact that board and get special permission. Sometimes they'll allow a certain number of days for you to see a client in their state without being licensed in their state. And especially right now with COVID, I think that they're granting more exceptions than they usually have. But yes, that's something you would want to definitely figure out ahead of time and not when they're already there. Mm-hmm. And again, it would be easier if you are fully licensed as opposed to being under supervision still.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, so let's say you're doing a therapy session, maybe it's your first session, and so you're just gathering information from this person, and all of a sudden someone comes flying through the door at the therapist's house. At the client's house. How do you manage that?
Well, I've had that happen twice. I'm trying to think. One of them was not a welcome barge in, and so she immediately turned off her video and just exited the session. And then later on, probably like 10 or 15 minutes later, emailed me because I was kind of sitting there like, what just happened? Mm-hmm. Luckily, they did not see what was going on. Okay. And then the other one, it was just a child, and so that wasn't that big of a deal. Really, I kind of leave it up to, I discuss this with my clients before we ever get started, and so we know, you know, what they're, I base it off of their comfort level. And, you know, some of them are fine. They're like, oh, if my family comes in, it's not a big deal. Some of them, you know, don't want a certain family member coming in. So
Sure.
we kind of, it's all important to really talk about all of these things ahead of time. And these are, again, all ideas that Dr. Amber Lyda brought up to get us to assess in that initial consult. And that was very helpful because it's things you don't think of.
Right.
How do you handle sort of the isolation of not being in an office where, like, I can, you know, you're in the break room and you talk with the other therapists, or something happens with the client and you can pop into another therapist's office and be like, hey, I just want to kind of run this by you and see what you think. And when you're in a home office doing telehealth, you don't necessarily have that maybe camaraderie that you would have in the office.
Right. And that's a good point. I think everyone's dealing with this right now too, just in our general life. And we've all
Yes.
to get creative how we connect. And I actually have a pretty robust network of therapists that I frequently Zoom with. And it's kind of neat because I'm not limited to just the ones that are in Kansas City. I meet with several who are in Florida. One of them is in New York.
That's cool.
So it's actually, you would think it would be isolating, but it's actually, I've still been able to keep up with, you know, having Zoom lunches, so to speak.
How do you meet them then?
I've met them in these groups. Most
Sweet.
of them are also online therapists. Some of them, though, are therapists that are in Kansas City that I've met in person, and we meet on Zoom. So
Cool.
Yeah. Are any of them specializing in working with moms too?
one of them is, and yeah, there's a really good group that's in Kansas City who specializes with moms. Dr. Centimano, I don't know if any of you know her, but she's great with mothers. So
Nice. Very nice. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is shifting gears a little bit, but if we might talk some about just how things can be similar and yet they can also be different in some ways with communication, and that including certainly verbally, how people are sharing their words with each other, but also some of the nonverbal, which is a big part of what we get as therapists and what we're learning more about our clients and their reactions. So I wondered if we might talk some too about what that's like, if there are things to anticipate that may be a little bit more challenging or take a bit more time in terms of the communication with clients.
yeah, so it's definitely different. However, I wouldn't call it worse. It's just different. You just have to adjust to it. First of all, I'm sure everyone's noticed this by now, but there's just a little bit different rhythm to a conversation with someone on Zoom or whatever video service, because the microphone only picks up who they feel like is it feels like is the main talking person. So it's very easy to like talk over each other on accident than it is in person. So you really just have to adjust to that new rhythm, and it happens naturally. At first it feels like it's choppy, and then it just kind of, the more you get used to it, the more it's just your brain just adjusts to that new conversation flow. It's almost like a pause. You pause extra after you stop talking. And with the body language, it is a little challenging at first because you have to get used to really attuning to their facial expression or what's going on in their shoulders. Whereas before you kind of look at their hands and feet, you know. But again, it's just interesting how you adjust to it. I hear a lot of people talking about Zoom fatigue, how, you know, they feel like it's tiring for them right now to be seeing people on Zoom. And I did experience that at first, but I actually don't anymore. I think that I have adjusted enough to where I don't even have to try to attune anymore. It's just, you know, my brain has learned how to how to read people on Zoom because I've, you know, been doing it for over a year. But yes, it's definitely, it's an adjustment at first. And you have to be more attuned to their face and the tone of their voice, and, you know, just from the waist or the chest up, really. I like to try to get the client to be as far back as so I can see as much of them as I can. But again, I'm not going to see their whole body. So.
Right. Right. And I think the last time when I connected with you and we were talking some about doing therapy online, I really appreciated you were sharing some about how establishing rapport and a relationship, an alliance, how it happens, of course, it comes into place, but with some clients that you might need just a little bit more time, perhaps, if the client is not as used to this modality either, that maybe it just does take a little bit more for them to feel comfortable and kind of get used to doing this, but also meeting with you and then delving into other things.
Yes, yeah, it does. I usually wait. So before, when you would see people in person, you know, we would delve in pretty quickly to the hard stuff. You know, after maybe the first session, once we established the rapport, it came pretty quickly because you could feel each other. But now I wait till about the third session, maybe even the fourth. I spend just a whole lot of time those first few sessions just really talking to the client and getting to know them. We do a values setting activity, which is, you know, it's delving a little bit but not getting too deep, so that they learn they can trust me with, you know, opening up and sharing a little bit about themselves, and that gives them more time to adjust and get used to seeing me on Zoom and not in person as well. So yes, I would say it takes a couple more sessions to get that rapport going, but it does eventually happen.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. And even now, as we are talking with you, I'm guessing we are looking at your office space where you
Yes.
typically will do your teletherapy.
Yes, this is my
It's
office.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I try to make it, you know, somewhat inviting, and they have fancy uh, things on your computer where you can draw and stuff on the screen, but I still like to use the paper. So I'll go back here with my Sharpies and draw things on that. Just, I like that better. But yes, this is the office.
Yeah, nice, nice. Yeah, it just makes me think, because there have been times in classes when I've talked with students about really being thoughtful, how you set up your therapeutic
Very
space.
much.
What do you put in it, and what does that foster? What might it communicate? And here I'm thinking, yeah, you just have this window. So what? Yeah, how you put.
Yeah. Well, they've actually started doing studies on this and publishing what's good and what's not good with, you know, everyone meeting online for COVID. But you want to use some neutral colors. You don't want to have anything that's too distracting. They say a plant helps, even if it's a fake plant.
Well, that's not going to die, right?
Exactly. That doesn't look
good.
That might hurt things if it looks like it's dying. And then the lighting is a big thing too. I'm sure all of us have experienced someone who's doing it with the light behind them, and that then you can't see their face. So you want to have the lighting be in front of you. I have a ring light actually, so that there's no shadows going on. As far as the sound and everything, I usually, when I'm in session, I will use earbuds, just because all of my family is at home now, so that helps protect their privacy. I recommend that they do that as well, the client. I have a white noise machine going outside the door, you know, just to make sure we have that extra layer of privacy. Yeah, there's a lot of things in setting up your home office that you wouldn't necessarily think about with all of this. So
Yeah, yeah, nice. But I do, and it looks like you have some colorful pens there too.
yes,
Way
there's
to draw with. Yeah, very nice.
another fake plant.
Oh, you have a second one back there.
So it's a fake little succulent.
Okay.
Look,
Good. Very good.
they look real.
Thanks. You can get away with a lot more on Zoom than you can in real life.
Sure.
All right, good. Well, I did have some more questions around crisis kinds of things. If we might shift back to that just a little bit more. So yeah, I know that this is something that comes up a lot in classes. Understandably, people are anxious about, what if your client is in crisis? How best do you support the client? And I think there is some added complexity around that with not having your client present right there with you. So yeah, and you were saying, which I think is so key, that it's important that there's planning ahead of time, that this is something that's thought out, and that some planning has taken place of what steps to take. The client has been informed about the process as well. But maybe if we might just talk some more too about what it might actually look like, what kinds of things you as the therapist might be thinking about if you hear that your client is having some suicidal thoughts, how you would proceed from that.
Yes. So like you said, there is a lot of pre-planning involved. And certain aspects of this are different than an in-person client. And then there's certain aspects that aren't. So for example, the safety plan, I will always do that if someone is at that level of having the suicidal ideation. I have that all online, and I can screen share so that we can both be on the same page with it, and they will help me come up with it. And but as far as the pre-planning goes, I always have 2 emergency contacts. If they are not in this local area, I will also get the name and number of their local hospital. I will call the hospital and see what the procedure would be if I needed to have someone, sent there. And then another interesting fact that I learned is that in certain rural areas, you can't always just call 911. That's not really the best way to get emergency services there. So I will ask in my intake paperwork, what is the best local emergency number to call other than 911? And are there any certain procedures that I would need to know about? So certain directions that, they may have in their area. So it's all about making sure you have all of that right up front. And always just be assessing for any type of, ideation or any thoughts. I assess my clients, every handful of sessions. If they have, a stronger history of that, we'll talk about it more frequently than I might in person. But just always it's all about staying on top of things and not waiting until it's already too late. And then as far as, if emergency were to happen and I would have to contact authorities, trying to stay on video or at least on the phone with the client. Right. Obviously that's not always going to be possible, but staying on the phone with maybe one of their emergency contacts and making sure. And I feel like this part is not too different than what might happen in, a private practice setting, because unless you're going to physically hold the client there, you're not going to know what they're doing when, if they want to leave the office, they can. So that part's probably going to be similar. Now, if you're in a hospital setting, that's going to be different, obviously. But knock on wood, I have not had that happen yet. I'm sure at some point it probably would.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and it makes me think too, when I've been in trainings on suicidality, I've heard conversation around whether it's acute or chronic. Mm-hmm. And how certainly, those acute episodes, those can come up, and assessing for it and proceeding however needed. And then it makes me think though too, that if you have a client who is maybe more chronic with having suicidal thinking, certainly with planning and at times having intentions, that may go back to that prior conversation of different treatment modalities and what's appropriate, that this is somebody who may need something more intensive anyway, mm-hmm. that having teletherapy sessions once a week would not be sufficient.
Yes, I agree with that. And you brought up a good point. It's not just about the ideation, it's about having the intent and the plan. You always want to see if they have that. because I've seen people who have the ideation, but not the actual intent and plan. And so I think that's very different. And definitely people who have those, the further levels of that, then they probably would do better in a in-person setting, hospitalization type setting.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it, Amy.
Okay. So what I thought I knew was that therapy occurs where the client is. Is that still considered accurate in teletherapy? So let's say I'm sitting here in Kansas, but I'm actually am licensed in Missouri. My understanding is I wouldn't be able to see anyone in Missouri. No, maybe I could. I don't know. I get confused. Can you help me with
It is confusing, let me tell you. This is why it took me a year to do all this research. And it shouldn't be this way, but I'm sorry. Let me get my camera. Okay, there we go.
Go along. The technology said yes. Let me make this fuzzy.
Just let me fix it. But no, you bring up a good point. It is so confusing. So you said you are licensed in Kansas?
No, I'm licensed in Missouri, and
Missouri,
I live in Kansas.
Yes. So according to what I have been taught, the therapy, it's both. It is where the client is, and it is where you are physically. So technically you would, if you're licensed in Missouri and you have a Kansas client, unless you're physically, well, you would not be able to physically operate in Kansas because you're not licensed in Kansas. They say that you should not do that.
Right.
However, Missouri will allow that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's about where both of you are located, I guess.
Okay.
Yes.
So since I'm licensed in Missouri, I could see Missouri clients if I was in Missouri?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And if you see them while you are in Kansas, the board, this is what the board said, that they would consider you operating in Kansas without a license.
Yes.
That's what they had told me.
Okay.
You know.
No one wants to do that.
No. Which I feel like it should be made easier, but we're getting there.
Yes.
It is. It's complicated living on the state line.
It is.
Yeah. Yep. Well, so technology, so given your experience, Candace, how has that gone for you? Have you run into issues that you've had to deal with?
Yes, well, obviously sometimes the camera gets blurry. The main issue, though, I would say is a slow or choppy internet signal. But I screened for that in my initial consultation. I asked, are you able to stream video services such as Netflix, things like that, without it being choppy or buffering a lot? And if the answer is yes, then they usually do have a strong enough internet signal. However, I do see some rural clients who it's hard to get a really strong internet signal out there. And it kind of varies from session to session. The majority of sessions are okay, but some sessions it just won't be good that day. So we will either reschedule or we'll finish the session by phone. And if you take insurance, that creates a whole new layer of complication, but I don't, so I can do that. But yeah, that's the biggest, is the internet signal, or if the whole system goes down, like I was saying earlier, Zoom went down this morning from what I heard. The Zoom's pretty good about not completely crashing, but sometimes it happens. Sometimes some therapists do like a practice session with their clients before they actually start seeing them. They'll do their consult via video and just make sure that the video is working okay and everything is good on both ends. So yeah, and then sometimes there's a lack of understanding of the technology. Some people won't know how to turn the audio or the video on, and there's that learning that has to happen before they can efficiently meet via video every time. So those are some considerations. that again, you have to kind of pre-plan for. Pre-planning is huge when you're doing online therapy.
Yeah. Yes, put your groundwork in place.
Yeah.
You bet. You bet. Well, and so along those lines too, what have you found most challenging about doing teletherapy? And also what have you found most rewarding about it?
Yeah, so at first, when I was just starting to get this put into place, one of the most challenging aspects was the acceptance in the field. I ran into quite a few people who, were judgmental about it, which, I don't blame them. I respect their opinion. Although there have been several pretty big studies worldwide on the efficacy of online therapy and how it is just as good, and if not in certain cases with some clients, it might even be better. I know myself, I'm an introvert, and so I actually have seen my own therapist both in person and online, and she even commented about how I seem to open up more when I'm online. So some people, it might just be more comfortable for them. But yeah, that was a big challenge, was the acceptance in the field, although that has changed drastically now that everyone's been forced to do it.
Right.
And not
Hard to
everybody,
complain now.
yeah, and not everyone likes it, and that's completely
Sure.
fine. It's not for every therapist. Another difficulty is just, there are more distractions, especially working with moms. If they have children who are at home, which pretty much all of them are right now, and interruptions. But, you can work through that because it's interesting to see them in their actual environment. You can see the ones who don't have any help because, they'll say, oh, my spouse is here, but he won't keep the kids for me so I can have this hour to myself, so that kind of gives me a new glimpse into their life. Or, you can see their surroundings. If their house looks very cluttered or dirty in some way, you can discuss that and bring that up. And then obviously another challenge were the tech glitches, but for the majority of sessions, it goes fairly well. That's not a huge problem. And then we touched on this earlier, we're all kind of missing the physical presence of other people, just physically being in the room with other people, even introverts like myself. We just, we crave that human connection. And I think that is a challenge for some.
Mm-hmm.
And then did you also ask what the rewards were? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah, no. And I
can't remember.
It would be a natural question follow-up anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that was on the little syllabus. And so I would say the accessibility and the convenience, obviously. I can add another hour into my workday because I don't have to commute to an office.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I can, schedule in that hour, or, before when the kids were in school, I'd have to, cut it off at a certain time, but now it's, a lot more flexible. I can meet with people some evenings, and it's just a lot more flexible that way because I don't have to go anywhere. And I think I forgot to mention, I did have an office one day a week before this. So for those who didn't want to meet online, I met online with the rest of them the rest of the week, and then in an office one day a week. And I've since dropped the office day. Another benefit to being an online therapist, I would say it saves money, obviously not having to rent an office. It can save the client money in gas and time of driving. Mm-hmm. And then once again, just the comfort of being in your own environment. A lot of them will have a pet, if they're having a difficult session, they'll hold their pet in their lap, or they'll be in their bed with like a soft blanket. Yeah, it's kind of neat, just what it can offer for people who are having a difficult time. Mm-hmm. So.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
The address, when you had your one day a week office, that actually made sense almost as a perk that you had a physical office location if somebody wanted to mail you a check, or you needed a not your house office address. But if you don't have that anymore, what do you do? Like if someone says, oh, I want to mail you a check, or do you have everybody pay you electronically? Or if they need your address for some reason, what do you give them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I actually try to encourage all of my clients to pay through my client portal. However, if I ever come across someone who's just completely not comfortable with that, I will have them mail a check, but I will have to give them my home address. I have heard of some therapists who are online, you can pay for a physical address that's not a PO box. I mean, I think it is physically a PO box, but it actually has a real address, because some places won't let you use a PO box. And I've not done that. First of all, I've heard that it's a little bit pricey. And also, I don't have the level of crisis clients or anything like that where I would be afraid of them to know my home address. But if you're working with that kind of population, that's probably something that's worth the money of investing into. But I've heard that that is an option. You can buy a physical address that's attached to a separate box from your house.
Good points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we've worked our way through, what I had on my outline. So I guess just any additional thoughts from anybody?
I appreciate you doing this. This was really helpful.
Yes.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, any information I can help. So much was given to me in the beginning. And so if anything I can pass on, I'm more than happy to. I hope I didn't talk your ears off. I
It's good.
kind of get long-winded.
No, I think it's good for students to hear from people that are in the field. It's like, this is what I'm actually doing. This is how I actually did it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
And, and if you wouldn't mind, Candace, too, your web address.
Oh, sure. Yes.
You see your practice.
Yes. So my practice is called Calm Connection Counseling, and it is Calm, CALM, Connection Counseling.com.
Nice.
And I focus on women and mothers. But I'm open, if I feel a connection with somebody who calls me, and especially in that consult, I'm open to seeing just about anyone. So.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and that makes me think of another question. How do you advertise your service?
Oh, yes. So that's another thing. If you are only online, SEO, which is search engine optimization, is a huge thing. That's basically how well your website connects to Google, using the correct keywords that people are searching for, also having a very wide internet presence. So I'm signed up with probably 5 or 6 different online directories. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. Mm-hmm. And then you can make YouTube videos, which is another way to get your SEO up. Just giving free tidbits of, like doing a breathing exercise or, some advice, on a certain thing that somebody might be dealing with. I've also done, before COVID, I would do in-person lunches with doctors and other people I thought who would see my population of clientele. So there's a lot of good webinars on how to market your online practice. So.
Do you have business cards?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
At some point, you might want to drop some by
Sure.
the department, because I know, like with our interns, they will sometimes want referral sources, like for their own clients, outpatient.
Yeah, that would be great. I would definitely do that.
Yeah, good point.
We'd like to do that too.
Anything else that anybody can think of?
One thing that I just really appreciate is when you said, yes, I was headed down this road. I was going for Missouri. Then I gave birth and I experienced some pretty, I don't know if you used the word profound, but it sounded like a difficult depression and anxiety period. Mm-hmm. In the way you said that so matter-of-factly, yes. It's a lovely, I don't know, sort of normalizing thing to do. Mental health people, after all, we are people, and we are subject to all of the same conditions of the people to whom we treat. And that I think it's really nice for folks to know that, sometimes we take a little time out and we attend to our own needs, and then we figure out in new ways of working and we head in that direction. And thank you for your honesty about that. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for saying that. And I do try to do that because I think moms especially need things to be normalized. Like, it's okay to feel this way as a mother and just in general. And I try to approach, you know, my clients with being that way. Like, we are all people, you know, we're all going through things. You know, I'm not better than you. We are just working together to try to get you on a better path. So and I think Avila really influenced me in that way. I really enjoyed my time there, and it really helped me to just be comfortable with just being myself in therapy a lot, and as a therapist. So thank you.
That was good to highlight, Amy. Yeah, so many times the path is not at all a straight line, nor should it be,
No,
to go where it needs to go.
absolutely. And because of those jagged edges, sometimes we end up exactly the place we need to be that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Yes,
It's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Neat.
good. Well, that sure is a nice note for us to land on, if that's if that's where things are landing. But yes, thank you, all of you. This has been fun to do, and we do foresee showing it to our students as they are about to start practicum. In fact, I think I want to show it to my internship students this fall too. I think it'll be fun to show. But these are great things that not only during this time of COVID, but I think ongoingly, things for our students and for people in the field to be thinking about and to be doing. I think teletherapy, it's taking off for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And we will continue to have it, utilize it, and people will be providing it. So it's good for us to be thinking and be doing, knowing more about.
Always evolving.
Yes.
And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this. I hope it can be some help
Lovely.
to some of your students.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to stop this recording.